Hello everybody. This is a tutorial on beans in the Spring framework. Okay. So first of all, what is a bean in the Spring framework? We have the definition. A bean is an object that is instantiated, assembled and otherwise managed by a Spring IOC container. A very simple definition of a Spring Bean would be an instance of a class that is managed by a Spring IOC container. Okay. A bean in Java is an instance of a class which we create using the new keyword. Okay, so any object in Java is a bean, but there is a difference between a Java bean and a Spring Bean. Okay, and we create Spring Beans by using these annotations. The first one is component, second one is repository, the third one is service, fourth one is bean. There are more annotations in order to be able to create beans in the Spring framework. But for the time being, let's stick with these four. Okay. So uh, let me let you know about the component annotation first of all. The component annotation is a class level annotation. During component scan in the Spring framework, it automatically detects classes annotated with the component. Okay. And it is a general purpose annotation for defining Spring Beans, and it is suitable for any class that needs to be managed by the Spring IOC container. Okay, so uh, this is not going to be enough. Okay, we have to actually do things practically to understand what beans are and how to use these annotations to create beans. Okay, so let's dive into the Eclipse. Okay, I'm going to create a Maven project. Okay, so in the group ID, Spring Quick Start artifact ID. Okay, and now, because this is a Maven project, I have to actually specify the dependencies that I need to use. Okay, so to use Spring, we need the dependency Spring MVC. It is going to import all the other dependencies from the Spring framework that we need to import into our project. Okay, okay, so the Spring framework has been imported. Okay, I'll just go ahead and Maven update project. Okay, okay. So we have Spring imported into our project. What we are going to do now is we are going to configure manually the Spring framework. Okay. So let's create a package over here in dot. I've created a separate package for configuration, and I'm going to create a new class called application config. This class needs to be annotated with the add configuration annotation. Okay, so any class that is annotated with the add configuration annotation, Spring is going to be able to look for beans inside of that application config class. Okay, okay, so now we have to specify the packages inside of which we want Spring to look for the components that are going to be the classes from which beans must be created. Okay, so Spring is going to look for components inside of this package and inside of any packages that exist inside of this package. Okay, so for example, if I first of all, let's just create a main class, okay, from which we are going to inject our beans. Now we are going to create another package for our entities, okay. Let's get the getters and setters as well over here, and a toString method, okay. Now this class can be instantiated, okay, but why instantiate ourselves when the Spring framework will do that for us, okay. So if I had to manually instantiate this class, I would have written a code that looked like this, okay. So here we are creating an instance of a class and we are assigning it to the variable which has the name u, which is of type user, okay. But Spring says that it is going to do all of this for us and it is going to manage this object that is created inside of the memory, okay. How? We can use that component annotation over here. Now that I've annotated this class with add component annotation, it is now a Spring component and I can use this dependency and I can inject it in our application, okay. Now this class has become a dependency, okay, which we can inject. So I no longer have to do something like this, okay, because whenever I start the application, the Spring framework is going to create the instance of this class because I have already annotated it with the add component annotation, okay. So how do I get, or how do I inject that dependency that we have just created, okay. We need an application context for that, okay. So we need an instance of an application context and I'm going to use the annotation config application context class for this, okay. Now we have created an instance of the application context, but we also need to let it know what kind of configuration we want it to use, okay. So we are going to set the configuration, okay. So I created an instance of application context, I let it know what configuration class do I want it to use, and then I refresh the context, okay. Now we will be able to retrieve or inject our dependency using this context variable, okay. So I'm going to create an object, okay. I created a variable of type object and assigned it the value that this method returns from the context. Okay, so this method always returns an object, okay, an instance of the class object. And let's print the class name of this object. Okay, so it lets me know that the class name or the fully qualified class name of this object is in.springbeans.entity.user, okay, which is this class. Okay, so now in order to be able to invoke methods from this class, we need to actually cast it. Okay, so if I did something like this, Java gives me an error. It scolds me because the type of the variable, the type of the instance that is returned from this method is an object, but I'm trying to assign it to a variable of type user. Okay, so now I need to cast it. Now Java does not return any errors. Okay, now let's just print the obj. Okay, so we get username as null and password as null because we do not have a parameterized constructor, and we did not use any setters to set the username and password. Okay, let's go back to the slides. Okay, so I talked about various annotations. This is not the only annotation add component that is used to create Spring Beans. Okay, there are annotations like repository and service as well. Okay, now what is the repository annotation? Data access object or repository classes usually represent the data access layer in an application, right? And they should be annotated with at repository. When we annotate DAO classes with at repository, we indicate that the role is data access component. Okay, they act as data access components. Okay, and as I said before, component is a general purpose annotation for defining Spring Beans. Okay, and if I actually go ahead and change the annotation and set it to at repository and run my application. Okay, there is no change in the output. That means that even with the change in annotations, the application still runs. Okay, but the DAO or repository classes usually represent data access layers. Okay, so they should be annotated with at repository when you are actually performing any JDBC operations, or if you are using any object relational mapping tools like Hibernate. Okay, so at that time you have to create data access objects. So those objects will be annotated with at repository annotation. Okay, and then there is at service annotation. The business logic of an application usually resides within the service layer. So we will use the at service annotation to indicate that a class belongs to that layer. Okay, so let's prove it with a demonstration. Okay, this still runs, right? Okay, so now the final annotation was bean annotation. Okay, now the bean annotation in Spring Framework is used to define a method that produces a bean instance. Okay, it is not a class level annotation, it is a method level annotation, and the instance that it is creating will be managed by Spring IOC container again. Okay, and can be injected into other beans using dependency injection. So let's try that out as well. Okay, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to create a method that returns user. This time around, let's set the username and password to something at least. Okay, let's remove this annotation from over here and now try running. Okay, let's check. Uh, okay, I know this is going to throw an error, but I will let you know why. Okay, what is the error message? No being named user available. You know why? Because I did not annotate this method with at bean annotation. Okay, so this time around, because we actually set the username and the password, they are not null in the output anymore, right? Okay, so how do I know what is the name for the bean that I have to pass in the get bean method? Okay, when we use the bean annotation, we are going to use the name of the method. Okay, if I'd said something like this, my user, okay, then I would have to use this particular name over here. Okay, let's actually run this so to demonstrate the error first. Okay, it says no bean named user available. Now I'm going to pass this over here. Okay, and the program runs successfully without any errors. Okay, now while using add component annotation, what or any of the other two annotations. Okay, how do we know? Uh, we actually take the class name and uh, we we take the class name and we pass it to the getBean method, but the first letter must be lowercase. Okay, and let me just take this out over here and add one of the other three annotations over here. Okay, now uh, there are other ways. Okay, we can actually go ahead and specify a bean name over here. Okay, so for example, the user. Okay, now I have to pass this to the getBean method for the output to be successful and the program to be successful. Okay, now the question is, why do we use this annotation when we have already component repository and services? Okay, so let's add another dependency. Okay, here I have the JSON dependency, and now uh, I'll just add it. Okay, let's just go ahead and Maven update project. Okay, now for example, if I want to create an instance of the class JSON, okay, now this class belongs to a library, right? So I can't just put an add component annotation over here because it is not a Java file, it is a class file, okay? And Eclipse is generous enough to show me the source code. And I cannot just add an annotation in this class, right? So I can't add component annotation or any of the other two annotations. So now what I have to do is I have to come over here and I have to create a method that is going to return an object of type JSON. Okay, so now I will be able to successfully get this from the application context. Okay, so let's just remove this for the timing. Okay, let's try this out. And I'm going to print the class name from the instance. Okay, so I get a bean without using the new keyword and without annotating this class with at component or at repository or at service annotation, right? So this bean annotation is also very useful, right? Okay, okay, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video and you gained a lot of knowledge from this video. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much. Bye.